Well, welcome back to Educated Guess. We did our best to sort of get through the ideas of how we end up with panspermia and how humans thought about it through the ages. But I wanted to point out that Jordan really did do a lot of homework on this one and really did a lot of work to join the dots of like a lot of different scientific theories and also things that we find in religious texts. So let's just do a quick recap, Jordan. Panspermia from the ancients to modern science.
Oh, well, uh, welcome back, everyone. We've had a few hours to go do like family things and,
Yeah.
a few hours to process what we just talked about. So hopefully it all makes more sense in our brains. So, so, the ideas of how life started at all, and how it could possibly get from one planet to another. I mean, it's not, there's so many things around this science that have many multiple theories that I just wanted to focus in on one branch and and really have that moment of like, here's a plausible explanation. Not saying it's the explanation, but slightly plausible, one in a million kind of things, which is enough for me to go on. Yeah. Um, so what are we going to talk about now is the more speculative side of all of this, and perhaps the funner side of all of this is what does it mean? What would it mean if it was true? What would it mean? What's the worst case? What's the best case? And all the things in between, because obviously this is not a black and white thing, and it's probably the thing that most people would want to talk about when they get to this kind of area anyway. What if ET was just around the corner?
Yeah, Jordan, all of your educated guesswork and all of your reading all those scientific papers about like rocks and like Oort clouds interacting with other suns and all of that. That's all very well. But just tell me, is ET coming or what?
Oh, let me just check. So first, I'm going to start with: do people even believe in aliens in the first place? Let's start with
Excellent.
that to know how many people out there would be freaked out by this. Well, I've got some. This is again going to be real different in different countries based on their culture, based on what is their you know consensus with how's it displayed to people.
Yeah.
Back
How do we
think
how do we even ask the question? Do you
yeah.
ask it in a way that sounds vaguely scientific, or do you make it sound wacky and stupid?
Yeah, perhaps the idea that people, ostracized for believing in aliens or what's in Area 51 and all of that,
Hmm.
maybe maybe is viewed as something that only an insane person would believe, but maybe it should be the opposite. Uh,
Well, I think I spent about way too much of the first session saying how, in a sense, the burden of proof is on the people that say there is no life elsewhere. Like, and obviously, I'm revealing my hand, which is not that I believe in aliens, but that I am fairly happy with the concept that they may or may not exist. I'm kind of happy either way, but I certainly think that it's a bold stance to say there's definitely none. I think that's a very, very bold stance myself.
so what I've got here is I've got some research. It's presented in a media article, but I'm going to present it to you what amount of people believe or were polled to believe. So we've got Germany. So this is Germany, USA, and Britain were polled. Do you
Ooh, can
believe
I
there's
guess?
Oh, sure. How many people? So the question was, do you believe there's extraterrestrial intelligent life? So go Germany, USA, Britain.
Okay, Germany, 20%, USA, 45%, Britain, yeah, I'd say about 30%.
Well, yeah, there's 56% in Germany,
Whoa.
54% in USA, and 52% Britain. So this is a majority. This isn't a minority.
And it's remarkably consistent across
Yeah.
all these different countries. Did you find figures for Australia, though?
So I've got the same question wasn't posed to Australians, but was the question was to Australians, do they believe aliens have been to Earth? And it was 34%, which is still a huge number. Like,
Hang on,
what?
been to Earth? That's a whole nother question here. Come on.
Yeah, well, that's a different question. But the closest relative thing stat I could find was 34% of Australians believe aliens have been to Earth, which is a different,
Okay.
more complex thing. But it's the it's not something that I guess which political side are you on? How many children in your family, and do you believe in aliens? It would be a bit of a
Well,
weird census.
clearly this sample of 50 people commissioned by New Idea magazine in 2008 or whatever is all very well, but can I just say I would like to distance myself from this so-called 34% of people, because I don't think they've been here unless we are the aliens, which is one variety of panspermia, by the way, Jordan, is that yeah, all the other animals evolved here naturally, but humans came here from somewhere else. Like God just put them there one day, shump. Or the other one is that, yeah, that humans came from like the stars, and like monkeys and chimpanzees are just like entirely separate.
Yeah,
Um,
I know that one of the movies that tackles this is Prometheus, which great movie. But the
Absolutely.
last thing where the all knowing wise guy just came with a vial of life and dipped it in a waterfall was slightly questionable as a theory to me. But I do love that movie, the idea of the all wise dude just dropping the vial of DNA. There's a fish for you.
Is that
So,
what that did? Is that what that was all about? Thank you for explaining that movie to me.
well,
Now I get it.
that's what I gathered from the end of the movie, is that there was this world, and then like he'd arrived at the top of a waterfall and dropped like what DNA was, and go, that'll form a human soon enough.
Well, to be honest, Jordan, by the time I got to the end of the movie, I'd completely forgotten about that scene at the start. So yeah. Anyway, I think you might be right. That's what it means. All right. Well, that is a surprising number of people who think that aliens have already arrived. Okay. Well, anyway, so you've got some educated guesswork for us to do, and what do you got?
So what I is that the when it comes to this topic, the thing that comes up all the time is something called the Fermi paradox. Which do you know?
Uh-huh.
Have you heard of that before?
Absolutely, and that's in a sense what I was referring to earlier. But yeah, without naming it, go ahead.
Which is that if aliens existed, why don't we see them? Why don't we just look into the stars and see like a McDonald's for aliens? Where's this? If they've all got spaceships and they're all flying around everywhere, and we're all super genius alien types, and we're just one of the many, why don't we see them? I want to get to that, but in this topic of thinking about public reaction, um,
Yeah,
it's
and why haven't we encountered their electromagnetic signals flying through the galaxy?
yeah,
Why haven't we picked up any? Yeah,
yeah, and in this conversation, but we'll get into that in a second. But in the conversation, it has to be noted that is a concept that's very widely thought of by people. Is where are the aliens if they existed? So
yeah.
you have to.
They're basically saying Fermi's paradox basically says, prove it, prove it, prove it.
Yeah,
Whether it's the aliens proving it or the humans proving it, either way, they're like, come on. If they existed, we'd have seen something by now.
yeah,
I don't buy it. I don't buy it myself, but it is a strong idea.
and one of the things that comes is that if all of a sudden we started getting these signals from another life, what do we do with that information? Would we even know?
Excellent question.
Like it's a very if there's a man sitting in the forest sending out Morse code signals right now, no humans will be collecting them. Because no one's looking for Morse code signals. Are we looking for the type of signal an advanced civilization would send out? Is radio or is that all like a primitive form of technology? We haven't yet mastered the better one. So
Correct. Or let's just say, even if they were using EMR to communicate, which is not improbable, is it possible that they were using it in a way that we haven't even conceived of yet, and so we can't even what's the word, intercept their transmissions? Because like in World War II, they were using tight band transmission to talk between ships over basically visible distances to avoid the enemy intercepting their signals. Maybe they've got like some sort of tight band that goes across the entire galaxy. Who knows? But the point is, we can't make any assumptions whatsoever about the kind of evidence that we would be looking for.
yeah, and another huge I guess spanner in all of this conversation that is like, what is in between galaxies? No one really knows what's in between
Yes.
galaxies.
Yeah.
Is it an impenetrable field of radiation or dust, or no one would know. because to get between a galaxy and another one would take 100,000 years, and we haven't
Yeah.
got that far. But does whatever's in between galaxies stop signals? We don't know. Um,
I see. I see. I hadn't even thought about that. I just, yeah, to be honest, I'll reveal my ignorance here. I was aware that there was, estimates out there about the distance between us and the next galaxy, and we can even know to a fairly good extent about our nearest neighbors. But I guess I assumed that it was just a whole bunch of nothing and in between, and that wasn't really a big problem one way or the other about signals.
well,
But
it's
maybe,
I would say it's like 100,000 years of light speed, which is obviously not the speed anyone or anything could feasibly travel under our
no,
scientific understanding. But
no,
the idea is that not that not that I have any. This is purely based off just research on the
sure,
internet, whatever that means.
yeah,
That the density of atoms between floating in space between galaxies is presumed to be significantly lower, but
hmm
not nothing.
not,
There is
not, yeah, yeah, not zero. Yes,
Yes.
yeah,
So if you are traveling at an immense speed through space between galaxies, there is a chance that you run into things, whether they be meteorites or just those atoms building up. When you get to the kind of speed you would need to go to get between galaxies, an atom is meaningful. You know,
yeah, absolutely. In interstellar space, traveling at light speed, yeah, you don't want to crash into small things.
No, because they would, yeah, no, like the the kind of conceptual ideas around going between those galaxies is what kind of damage would a single atom do? If would it, could it penetrate? How do you make a spaceship with those kind of magnetic, preventers and those kind of, sci-fi, currently ideas? So
Well, yeah. So you're saying it's entirely unknown to us at the moment, even if we had the ability to put ourselves into stasis for hundreds of thousands of years and travel at the speed of light. It's still not clear how we would engineer a craft to actually survive the
but
journey.
but we're gonna go on
Yeah.
the assumption that
Mm.
perhaps if there was a civilization out there advanced enough, they would know this, and
Yeah.
they would have
Let's
thought.
assume that.
Let's
Yeah.
assume that they know they've beaten this problem. But
Yeah.
but in this context, is between a galaxy, there's not nothing. There's a lot of something, um, that is, even though it's very not dense,
Mm.
it's still something to stop a signal over 100,000 years of travel, because the signal of a radio wave is at the speed of light. All electromagnetic
That's
signals
right.
are. So over the 100,000 years of traveling through that space, how many atoms do you have to run into before your signal is totally jambled? And that's not including like the ideas of like red shifting or like the just the signals getting stretched or shrunk.
Yeah, that's right, and all kinds of problems that you may conceivably encounter. You thought it was hard getting wireless from one end of the house to the other. That imagine trying to send signals through space. So, um, quick question: when it comes to the electromagnetic radiation that humans have been putting out so far in history, um, let's say we start with the first radio transmissions on Earth. How far would they have gotten in
So
the time? Have we even reached the end of the solar system by this
Well,
stage? Or
well, so this is what I've actually got. I've got some of the. So in an article of go, how far into space has humanity's voice reached? So we're going to talk about this
yeah,
as humanity's voice,
okay.
which is the signal that we've sent out, which
Hmm.
is so going that all our signals are going at the speed of light. They're the ones we care about. We've got our radio transmissions, we've got microwave transmissions. We've got the earliest signal we've sent out roughly 200 years ago, which is a very weak radio signal, but let's assume that can just go on forever. Um,
200 years, my goodness. Okay.
so we've got I've got a picture here that I can describe as a spiral galaxy, which is the Milky Way, and there's a section that's zoomed in onto about maybe a 20th of it. So that's our arm of the Milky Way galaxy, and if you zoom in on that to roughly 1 pixel, that's our whole voice.
That's as
So
far as it's gone so far.
So even within our galaxy, if you zoom in multiple times, we've barely even made a dent on our galaxy. If there was if there was hundreds of intelligent lives just in our arm of the galaxy, we
We
haven't
still
even
wouldn't have
reached.
reached them.
We
Yeah.
still wouldn't have reached them with our earliest things like testing 1, 2, 3 on the
Mm.
Morse code. We wouldn't have even come
Yeah.
close to reaching. So the I guess I want to challenge that idea of the Fermi paradox of why don't we just see aliens everywhere? Well, is our arm of the galaxy particularly uninteresting that, you know, if I dropped you off on a random place on Earth, there's a high chance that you wouldn't see any humans.
Oh,
So
absolutely, absolutely. Isn't that the number one sort of counter argument to the Fermi paradox? Is, well, come on, it's really big out there. Like, that's kind of the number one objection. There are other more technical objections, but I think the best one is, it's, wow, spaceman is really big, like really big. But like as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy said all those years ago, you think it's a long way to the corner shop, but that's peanuts compared to space.
yeah. So what I've done is I've gone and done some research into stars within 100 light years. So we'll take it as 100
Okay.
light years as the first meaningful, like
That's our neighborhood, relatively speaking.
yeah, our neighborhood is 100 light years. So we've had 200 light years around us of signal, but
Yeah.
what is 100 light years? So there's 14,600 stars within 100 light years. So
Well,
14,000
quite a
stars.
lot.
That's how
Okay.
many we've reached. So we've reached
Wow.
14,000 stars, which is a lot. But
I'm impressed.
in the galaxy, there's like
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of stars just in our galaxy.
Yeah.
So, but if you take the earliest signal, so if there was someone, let's just say there's an alien out there listening from, the most weakest radio signal out there, just for fun, we've reached 250,000 stars. So there's a lot of stars to assume that perhaps life could just be on one or two out of 250,000. They're like, oh, I imagine that a nice little civilization is out there with their nice little antennas and their nice little microwave, dishes.
Just like ours, with their large area, antenna or whatever it is. That was it, square kilometer array. All that sort of stuff.
And they're sitting there going, man, the universe is nice and peaceful. They're about to get absolutely bombarded with signals from us. The amount of signals that humanity sends out right now is ridiculous.
It's an absolute shitstorm, if I can just swear for a second. If you compare what we were sending out in the very early days of radio, a little bit of jazz music and some baseball scores, and fast forward to like the 1960s, and there's rock and roll going out there, and then we invent FM, and then we start sending out television like from wall to wall. And then when you think about all the military use of EMR and all the rest of it, yeah, it's an absolute storm of signals that we're sending out.
Yeah, so if they've got their satellites pointed at us, thinking in 50 years' time it's going to go from silent to a million channels.
Oh no, I think it's going to be slow at first. They're just going to pick up a tiny little bit, and then they're going to pick up a little bit more, and then all of a sudden it's just going to go up a cliff.
Yeah. So let's go back to, how would we know if they've got our signal 100, 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. They've sent a signal back. So
that's right. So that hasn't even got to us yet.
So the earliest time we even looked at receiving a signal, like there's been a few of these things. The earliest time we've ever thought of listening to space was back in the 70s. Now,
SETI, was that when SETI started?
Yeah,
Search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Now, some of this is probably in the way that this unfolded in the news. You could probably relate to how this worked more. But we got some signals back, and everyone thought, oh, there's just life. There was a constant signal. It was found out to be later to be a pulsing star or some kind of thing that was just sending a regular signal into all of space.
Well, one of the discoveries that the SETI program led to was that there are these regular signals coming from astronomical bodies in space.
But thinking of that, the 70s when we started listening. So I'm gonna relate all of that sending and come it back to listening, because obviously it would take some kind of civilization a long time to get to us.
Yes.
Even if we're sending it at the signal of light, unless they had light speed travel, it's still going to take them many years to get here. So in 30 years of us listening, that's 11 stars within, or 11 G type stars, which is very similar to our own star, which is the main hypothesized type of star that would have life. Is there's only 11. So if something within so there's 11 planets that could have potentially had our signal, had time to work on getting here, and to come here if they only went off our signals.
Oh, okay. Well, so yeah, that's right. Okay, so wait a minute. 11 G type stars that might have habitable planets around it, according to our definition, that may have picked up our signal since, within enough time for them to reply.
Yes.
So you've factored the reply time in already. So from starting in 1970, whatever, with when we first pointed satellites at space and said, "Please listen," we could potentially have received a reply from 11G type stars.
Well, that's if they could. No, that's not signal. That's just getting here. The signal is a bit different because we've sent out. So we've reached 250,000, but at the edge. But we'll use the half number because obviously half to get there, half to get back.
Yeah, let's be conservative here as well.
That's 14,600 that have had time to get the signal, send it back if they were, say, 100 light years away.
Yeah.
So, and that's assuming that they figured out, like, they were even listening for us, or we even know, like we said, know what they would send back to us. So, perhaps they're sending their codex of all information, and we go, oh, space dust. So.
Yeah, that's right. They've already transmitted their civilizational link. They've already sent us a bitly in cosmic terms, and we had no idea how to decode it.
So, one thing I want to say. So, I have a National Geographic article I thought was particularly interesting. How would humanity take finding if there was an alien? How would we take it? So, and interestingly enough, what they speak about is that they know we would probably take it pretty well because of all the false times that people have been told aliens are just on Mars.
Yes. I think they're making an excellent point there. I think a lot of people are already quite accustomed to the idea. I mentioned War of the Worlds in the last session, and so that was very much they've come to kill us all, which was like obviously bad news. But that's almost 100 years ago now that book was written. Oh no, I think it's at least 100 years. And so, yeah, we've had a long time to get used to the idea of hostile alien species. And I think we've also had quite a long time to get used to the idea that they might even want to peacefully coexist. So both of those possibilities have been around for a long time. But also, I would point out that we've also received signals from space in the past, which turned out to be stars, or in another case, it turned out to be the microwave that someone was like making their lunch, and like a few people were absolutely convinced that it was indisputably a signal of like machines existing. Basically, that was how they took it. Not so much intelligent life, but machines. And then it turned out to be a microwave that was interfering with their equipment, which is very, very disappointing. But I think if we received a reply, or no, not even a reply, just a signal from an alien source, and it was undisputably an intelligent source coming from somewhere else, I think, if I'm honest, Jordan, I think a lot of people would just disbelieve it.
Yeah, that's that. Even the false, news that life was on Mars, which was then found. Oh, whoops, that's not life on Mars.
We jumped the gun there a bit with that one. Yeah,
but even the idea that like life was just around the corner, like merely a trip over to Mars, is that
a hop, skip, and a jump.
Most people ignored the news. Most people went, So,
well, I mean, they've got so many other things to think about, and it's not as though this kind of news, it might be big news if you're interested in this kind of thing, but it depends like what websites you're surfing on a regular basis. It really depends like what your echo chamber is like bringing to you. I think a lot of people couldn't really care less like what's coming from astronomy.
So and it's so so you've spoke of SETI, which is the one of the agencies connected to finding extraterrestrial life, but there's also METI, which is messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, and they suggest that people would probably be similarly either not caring or positive towards the idea of an intelligent life contacting us.
Well, I think absolutely. I think you would find people were either apathetic or into it.
Yeah, and so, but there's something I want to. This is one of the perhaps more interesting aspects of perhaps the bias that perhaps me and you both have around this, is that we both assume that NASA or a space agency that's perhaps aligned with, say, we're Australians or Australia's interests are the people who make this contact. There's a really interesting
Mm.
argument or idea out there is, what if it wasn't one of the superpowers that we deem as the right one? You
Oh,
know,
or even you go back to the Cold War, the Americans were convinced on a number of occasions that the Russians had made contact.
yeah.
And
So
when I say the Americans, I just mean that a handful of people in, one of the agencies was like, oh, maybe they've had contact and maybe that's where they got this technology from. Like people did entertain these ideas that contact could have happened, but it went into a black box somewhere on the other side of the planet. And of course, yes, it could be some relatively small program somewhere that you would never expect. That's right.
yeah, so a lot of the time, these statistics on like how people feel about aliens, how they, they're assuming that their government is the one who's made the contact, and their government has like signed the peace treaty. They get all the information just for them.
That's
But
right.
often not think about, if you're an alien civilization, you probably wouldn't deem the ideas of borders or territories to be that crucial in I'm only going to give it to the. It would just be like, here's all the information, planet
Oh,
Earth.
Jordan, just imagine that we're like orbiting, uh, right now a distant planet around Sirius or something, and we're looking down on it from space, and it's from orbit, and it's clear that the planet is highly habited, and we're sort of examining its features with our high powered instruments from orbit. I I don't think unless we had an anthropologist or a political scientist on board, I don't think people would be thinking all that much about political divisions within that planet. They would be just going, whoopee, we found a planet and everything on it is more or less one species and like more or less one political consciousness. And that's how science fiction tends to assume as well. You get the odd title where they're like, oh, we found an alien planet, but um, they're having disagreements amongst themselves, or there's actually different species that are both intelligent on this same planet. But by and large, we go, there's Martians and there's Venusians or whatever,
Yeah.
back in the day.
And one of the more funny things that I came across when researching this was, what if you're an alien species and you came across Earth, and your measure of like success was like biomass
Yeah.
or size?
Yeah.
Humans don't meet any of these things. And the idea that the reason cows are so connected with the idea of alien abductions or alien
It's
mutilations or
because there's
whatever.
so many of
There's
them.
so many of them. To a spaceship, cows seem very successful. They're everywhere.
Absolutely. And if you were biosampling planet Earth, there's a very good chance you would pick up a sheep or a cow. Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. So we better get a flag and just wave it up. Us guys, give us the
Yeah.
information.
Not the cars or sheep. And Jordan, you might also be familiar with the theory that aliens would conclude that the cars were in charge, and
Yeah,
that the humans were the servants of the motor vehicles. And I do think there is a lot of truth in that idea.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that I don't know how you, especially the idea of like humans' absolute non-observance of what we deem lesser life forms when
Yeah.
we claim a forest or remove an ocean bed for
Yeah.
shipping, is that
Yeah.
would we narrow down to a single species or a single kind of thing? Perhaps they would. It's a complex kind of thought of, if we got a
Yeah.
signal back, would it even go to us? So
Oh, that's right. Absolutely. Would it go to our political faction? Would it go to a scientific? Well, I mean, I would argue at this point in history, Jordan, that the international scientific community is an international scientific community. I would argue that it is one of the most international aspects of all of human endeavor. Um, you know, that and shipping. So shipping and science are basically very, very, very international endeavors where most of the people that are in them think of themselves as participating in a global phenomenon, and they're not really thinking all that much about national interest. But it doesn't. You've only got to step away from that for a minute to start getting back to sort of political divisions. But at least science has a relatively international view of things. So maybe we can hope that if an obscure observatory in you know let's say Chile, which apparently has some excellent observatories because it's got some relatively unlight polluted and electromagnetically unpolluted parts of the world. Maybe somewhere in Chile they pick it up and then they're happy to share it with us. But maybe they're like, stuff you, we're not sharing.
Yeah, and one of the things that in this thinking of, if we send a signal out, then we get a signal back. If you're intelligent enough to get a signal and send it back, you would try to pair the kind of signal you receive to what you sent. And
Yes.
and the places in the on Earth that are still using the technology that we would have been sending signals from 50, 60 years ago are probably not America's and China's and Russia's. They're probably
I
less
see.
developed nations that have the
Yeah.
equipment to even receive the signal. You know,
Oh, I see. If they're responding on the same, band, so to speak. So can you explain something to me, Jordan? When the world switched, well, not the world, when parts of the world switched to digital television, it is still being broadcast terrestrially on, from like a transmission tower, or how does it work?
oh, I'm no transmissions engineer, but yeah, yes, it is. There's terrestrial and satellite sending of that information, but the satellites are directional satellites. They are mostly sending it towards the planet. So yeah,
Right. Yeah.
so they're not. It would be a huge waste of energy to beam it up into space. So there's most of them are aimed down, directionally. So
But whereas in the early days of television, it was just like
well,
it was just like
you would assume the early signals are ones that are terrestrial, that are like microwave or radio, that would make it into space, just because they are, an Earth-based, tower is, but in a sense, aiming upwards because it's aiming in all directions on a curved planet.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it is aiming towards a horizon, which is up. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. Every horizon points up. Ultimately, that's right. If you draw straight lines from the edge of a circle, that's right. So, but nonetheless, you're saying that if they try to respond on the same sort of wavelengths that they received that radio signal in 1920, we may or may not receive it in return. Although my counter argument to that, Jordan, is that the world is still full of shortwave radio enthusiasts.
yes, yes, and that's one of the thoughts behind why some people are more into that, is because they're hoping to get, there's a huge community of people out there who are trying to contact the space station and talk to the space station, and perhaps they are the kind of people who would receive that old fashioned signal to back to us. So
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be like a hostile country. It could just be like a community of amateur radio operators who pick it up, who may or may not, you know who to trust with the information. Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
yeah, so the on this idea of signals being sent to space, that there was an intentional. So uh, basically, a scientific group decided that they would actually. So we've had like physical messages sent to aliens, in the attached to satellites. Oh no, like the Voyager. They have the golden disc and such that.
Yeah.
But essentially, this is in uh, you know. Uh, Norwegian city. So I'm going to mispronounce this
Go
badly,
on.
but
Go on. Have a crack.
Tromso,
Yeah, Tromso.
with an O crossed out, whatever that
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
They decided to send a short radio program, basically to aliens, like "Hello, aliens, this is only to you." So it was
That's the
electronic.
headquarters of H5P, by the way, Jordan.
Uh, so it was electronic music, a tutorial about geometry, and how to use binary numbers.
Okay, so that's what they sent out recently,
Yeah,
or
so they recently
okay.
sent this out. They sent this out trying to, I guess, give the aliens something, for the alien audience, not
Yeah.
for the human audience that they can just listen in on.
They
And
sent out some geometry, some binary, and
electronic music, I guess that's
okay, cool. All right, some
something.
Norwegian techno. Okay.
Yeah, so it's I guess a pattern of some kind, which is probably
No. Well, I mean that's the point of techno. It's unmistakably patterned, and I think it's a very good choice. Yeah,
yes. So,
absolutely.
but in doing so, it raises the question of, if we put more power and more, like, it's a signal that, like, a lot of our signals might get there, or they might be jambled, or they might be, oh, don't worry, that's a distant, like, star that's making some weird anomalies, and it's not really an intelligent life. But this is a signal with all the power. Get it out there. So if you were to receive it, it would be a lot clearer than what perhaps you'd received earlier. And it was aimed at specific places.
I was going to say, did they point it in a particular direction
Well,
cosmically?
yeah, I mean, I think they pointed at the closest stars that were
Yeah.
a logical so it was targeted at JG 723 or Luton star, which is a 12 years away from our solar system. So a pretty
Okay.
close star. But so we'll have to wait 12 years from the reply of when this was sent, which was a couple of years ago. This is in 2017. So we have to obviously wait 12 years for it to get there, 12 years for it to get back. So we got some time to hang around. But the idea of intentionally trying to provoke, if you're an alien and you get electronic music, do you get provoked? Do you enjoy the electronic music? Is this the world divided by electronic music lovers and not?
Yeah.
Is this something that we want to do as humanity? Should we start cloaking ourselves in a galaxy potentially filled with intelligent lives until we can stop? Like, does intelligent life want to conquer? Does intelligent life want to, do we take our own human beliefs in these kind of things, which is perhaps some of us would want to conquer the galaxy, some would want to, make it filled with positives,
Absolutely. I mean, we all know people that you and I know personally. If they were in charge, they'd be out to conquer, and we know other people who, if they were in charge, they'd just be like, "Oh, isn't this fascinating?" Well, which question do you want to tackle first?
Well, this we'll go for the conquering one first. I'll write down what I'm about to ask you, so I want to ask it to you in a minute.
Okay. And just let me think about techno and aliens for a minute, because I mean that was the question I actually wanted to talk about the most out of everything you just said, because I'd never really thought about it before. I mean, I've thought about aliens and human culture and how they would think about it, but techno specifically, that's what makes this interesting. So it's like,
even
it's
if you beam techno to certain parts of the earth, then you might have declared war. So
yeah, exactly. And so techno is obviously hugely controversial, even just on planet Earth, let alone in interstellar space. So my provisional answer, and this is going to sound like a bit of a fence sit and a bit of a cop out, and it definitely is, but this is honestly what I think. I think that aliens will be divided about it. And so when it comes to this intelligent society on the other end, well, maybe it's not even a society, maybe it's just a couple of people. People, there I go, I say people. I'm importing my biases here already. But we have no reason to assume that their view of culture is in any way uniform, and that I think that a lot of science fiction writers have already covered this. But in the early days, there was definitely a sense that if we encounter life from Mars, it is completely and utterly uniform in all of its attitudes and opinions, which is obviously ridiculous. Unless, you're talking Doctor Who, the Ood, who are very much a hive species who share a consciousness. Well, even if you share a consciousness, there's still going to be differences and shades and textures within that consciousness. And I would even argue that humanity, via the internet, is beginning to share a consciousness, but it's clearly a very conflicted consciousness, but nonetheless one that we are starting to share in all sorts of strange ways. And so I do think that some aliens would like techno and some wouldn't. There you go. That's my answer.
And I think this importantly comes back to, what if we received back country music? Would we block off all communications, or would we continue? And obviously, if someone likes country music, just an example, pick your music that you dislike of your choice.
Well, no. The obvious answer now is, well, it depends what kind of country we're talking about here.
But I do think, interesting enough, techno music probably is the most universal type of music. It's probably the only one that could be listened. I know that, as much as I like Spanish love songs, I don't know if I could sit down and listen to them, but I could probably listen to Spanish techno. So
100%. I think techno is truly the world's first, most truly universal music genre. Absolutely. And you know what's funny? When I was 20, I didn't like techno, Jordan. And then when I was 25, I liked it because I'd been exposed to enough of it, and I got to appreciate the repetitiveness after a while, and the idea of variation and repetition. And fast forward, I thought that I would no longer like it at the age I am now. I actually like it more than I ever did. I just don't like it as hardcore as I used to, but I still like repetitive electronic-based music. I like it more than ever.
Yeah. So, and I mean, but you have to like. Like I know that there's some animals who can appreciate music, but a
Mm.
large majority of animals I don't think have any appreciation of what
A large
music
majority
is.
of animals, that's right. When we say they have no appreciation, we don't mean they don't like it. We just mean they don't process it.
Yeah,
They don't receive it.
it is a noise to
Yeah.
them. It's not,
Yeah.
and the idea of sending binary, it's to us it seems so like I know it's probably a organized sequence way of us, explaining how our systems and computers work, but in the sense that if you send out binary and got it back 60, 70 years later, it's similar to if you send out the instructions of how to do Morse code. I feel,
Very,
that
very similar. That's right.
should we be sending out the idea of how to do supercomputing and hoping that at least what we do in 10 years is something equivalent to what we might get back in 70? So
Well, personally, I have no objection to sending out antiquated stuff like Morse code or whatever, because quite apart from anything else, Morse code is relatively simple, relatively trivial, cryptographically speaking, as in, the science of concealing things. Morse code is very easy to crack. The difficulty for the alien species will be actually figuring out what it
oh,
actually
I've
says,
lost
but
you,
it won't
Sam.
take them
Where'd you go?
long to work out that there's
Oh, I can't hear
26
you.
different signals in there. Oh, have I gone quiet?
You've unplugged yourself. I really want to
Hello?
know what the thing for
Hello?
alien
Hello?
species will be.
The signal is coming through on
I
the
can't hear you. Oh, now I
yeah.
can hear you.
You've reappeared. Okay, excellent. I was just going to say, Morse code, I think, is trivial for any sort of intelligent species that knows how to point an antenna at space. They'll be able to figure out Morse code. But the question you asked is, will we have any understanding of what's coming back? I think if anything came back from space that was Morse code, there's a very good chance that some crazy, enthusiast out there is going to pick up that signal. They're going to recognize it as having a machine-like origin, and then they're going to be like, wait a second, I actually don't understand Morse code, but I do have a nerd friend in Norway who does.
Well, do you think if someone tomorrow came out and said, I think I just got Morse code from space, do you
Yeah.
think anyone would stop and listen to that person?
Oh, 100%. Not everybody, but somebody would, right? So obviously, if they asked me at 7 in the morning, I'm going to be like, I'm actually busy with my 2 children. But if they asked me at 11, I'd be like, hell yeah, let's sit down and work out what this signal says. But if they asked a Morse code enthusiast, well, I think they would absolutely drop everything to figure it out. And by the way, Jordan, how long do you reckon it would take you of internet searching to find a Morse code enthusiast?
Oh, not long. Yeah, I know. In half an hour, I could find one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guarantee you within 10 minutes you would have a reply.
So this is the question I was going to ask you before, and this is where I think that it becomes kind of dangerous for us as a society to make this kind of choice to send out these signals. Is
Sure.
It's similar in the thought process of climate change, where we do these things today, but it doesn't really affect us. Like, we're not the sufferers of the thing. If you send out a signal to someone 100,000 light years away, or let's just say even 100 years away, they get the signal, they send it back, and it's a Morse code of "we're coming."
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just imagine receiving, and that's all the signal said. We're coming. I mean, that's incredibly chilling. I mean, I can't think of any combination of words that's more chilling than that. And
yeah. What do you think are the people that we've like? Would you go, God damn those people from the 2000s sending
from
out
Tromso,
sending out signals, trying to flag it? We don't want to be flagged down. Like, we shush everyone. Is it ethically responsible to send out a signal that we don't have to have reply to?
Well, I mean, I think it's look. Let's just say this: you're absolutely right that currently we are making decisions on behalf of future generations that we have not consulted and can't consult. But it's worse than that. We're making decisions where we could reasonably assume that future generations would not be happy with what we're doing, right? And we're just gaily making those decisions anyway. So here's the thing. On the order of priorities and sort of moral and ethical problematic, some sort of scale of how problematic things are, I think beaming signals into space is among the least problematic things we are doing that might affect future generations. And I don't just mean in terms of the probability, because the probability is small, let's face it, but I also mean in terms of the likely impact, even if it was 100% sure. But having said that, yes, it is irresponsible to beam the most powerful signal you can possibly manage into space without asking the rest of humanity. But what I would love to see is what would happen if the people in Tromso or whatever asked the rest of humanity that question. How many people would even bother to reply? And how many people would even be aware that they'd asked that question? Should they wait around for everyone to become aware before they send out this signal? And also, while we're at it, let's shut down radio and television, because that's also irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, it really is just a homing beacon to the aliens. Now you think about it.
Yeah.
So we should just everyone shush, stop using your phones. Yeah.
Everyone shush. You know what, Jordan? I think it's a much more urgent issue that we need to stop using sonar at sea.
Oh, yes.
That's clearly what's killing all these whales. I mean, it's obvious, but there's a ton of evidence to support it. But no, we don't even have the remotest bit of willingness to stop sending out these horrifically loud signals into the ocean. So, if you want to argue about what is humanity's ethical capability when it comes to controlling the signals we send into space, good luck, but when it comes to should we be deliberately contacting alien civilizations, well, that's a really, really good question. And my answer is a cautious yes. I don't think we can really defend a choice not to. So we're doing it anyway. But leaving that aside, I think the consequences are possibly quite dreadful. But humanity's always had a tremendous curiosity and has never, ever stopped to think about the consequences. So why start now, I say?
Do you think if there was a world where we got the signal that said, "We're coming, look out," or the equivalent of that, do you think we could get everyone to be quiet so we stop sending the signals out? Do you think
there's a vague chance, I suppose.
We are coming with a warship. Please continue sending these signals. Full stop. Is there a chance that humanity would ever be quiet for a while?
I suppose it's at that point it's possible that global cooperation could begin, and that we would only be watching Netflix on LAN from then on. It would have to be wired connections only.
Oh no! Oh no! Imagine plugging your phone into the wall. That'd be the worst.
Or maybe we would invent some sort of wireless protocol that didn't travel out into the world. I mean, look, from my understanding, those signals would probably not be able to be uncoded past a certain point. That's from what I understand. But they might still be able to recognize them as having an intelligent origin. But from my understanding, radio and television signals would be much more easy for them to decode than...
at least identify that they're being sent out. Radio. There is a lot of radio waves just floating around in space. You probably most kind of signals would be blocking out random radio waves, but perhaps studying those more high frequency radio waves would be something that you would be surprised at if you were searching for things.
Yeah. Well, and what frequencies are we looking at? When we...
I mean, most of the, there is telescopes going into space right now that look at microwaves and look at those, higher frequency waves, because that is what is more visible when you go into, the universe is essentially, in terms of visible light, is basically dark, whereas in terms of those microwaves and those other kind of infrared and the things outside of the visible spectrum, even on both sides, are much more luminous when looked at space. So
we're trying to pick up non-visible stuff mostly. Okay, all right, fair enough.
I mean, that's the Hubble telescope replacement is essentially not for visible light. So that shows that visible light only gets you so far, but we are actively looking out into space for other signs of life, for other signals. So you would assume other types of life would also have that same approach to let's look for more broad wavelengths. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah. So they would be looking.
Oh, absolutely. And there's no question in my mind if there's an intelligent species out there, then well, just like we discussed in the first half, that this idea of like panspermia is very ancient and seems to be widely shared by many cultures. We haven't really looked at Asia and Africa all that much, but we've certainly found, you know, the idea in the Christian tradition, in the Jewish tradition in Egypt. We found it in India. So I'd be willing to speculate that we could probably find the idea elsewhere. And so, you know, I have no reason to assume whatsoever that an intelligent species somewhere else would not also be wondering about the existence of other intelligent species. It would seem strange to me. But obviously, here we are making assumptions based on our own experience.
Yeah, and on that, there was like from the pre-colonization American civilizations and South American, there was heaps of things I just didn't have time to. Their cultural beliefs are so complex that I just didn't have time to wrap my head around that many. So
absolutely, and the pre-Columbia is absolutely fascinating, but it's very problematic. It's hard to study because the written sources are few, and a lot of it is reconstructed, and there's a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of maybe this, maybe that goes on. So yeah, it's hard to study the pre-Columbian. Yeah.
And a lot of it was blended with perhaps modern theories that are
yes.
not authentic of what they 100%. Believe.
I think it's blended with a lot of New Age nonsense, if I'm honest, where that I think that people like to imagine all sorts of fanciful things about what Mayans and Aztecs and whatever thought about stuff, and Incas. And I think that let's just put it more bluntly, that there's a whole lot of hippie nonsense about what Mayas and Aztecs and Incans were thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. With a cultural system so based off stars and all of that, it's only natural for people to come up with explanations over hundreds of years of what that meant. So,
but they certainly were very interested in stars. There's no question about that.
Yeah. So there ends my journey into accidental panspermia.
Okay.
Are there any final thoughts you'd like to put on your like intentional panspermia? Now, this is right off the deep end of speculation. As you spoke of, us being the rats that got off the back of the ship. This is one that perhaps I think is perhaps way more complex and way more out there, because it is it's a challenge to think that, and this is something that I want to in the future dive real deep in with you, particularly around some of the theories that connect ancient, pyramids and things like that to communicating with aliens. But do you have any elevator pitches on some thoughts on that?
Deliberate panspermia, intentional panspermia. Well, I mean, obviously the once again, our frame of reference is humanity. So I would say that humanity is ambitious and entertains absolutely the ambition to sperm itself all over the place. And there's no question in my mind that given half an opportunity, humanity will be out there just absolutely polluting everything in sight with our presence. And we will absolutely not hesitate to do so. And so in a sense, I think humanity is, and the sort of ambitions we have is evidence of intentional panspermia being, quite a plausible concept in relation to intelligent life. And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. If we make contact with somebody else, are they going to conquer us? Are they going to communicate with us on a neutral basis? Are they going to try and help us to solve our nuclear standoff or whatever? Because that's what people thought in the Cold War. The aliens will come and they'll stop us from blowing each other up. I would say
some of that idea of we were holding ourselves hostage to see if the aliens would pop out of the dark is a real.
We're pointing the nuclear 6-gun at our own head and then hoping that they would come and
like if you're out there, aliens, now's the time.
Now would be a good time. Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like desperate X tactics or something. Yeah, for sure.
And there's people out there who think that actually was perhaps some of the theory of the Cold War is let's go to space and let them know we're here. We're a spacefaring civilization, guys. Then we'll point the nuclear bombs at ourselves and say, okay, give us the technology now, or we'll blow ourselves to smithereens. So
Also, there's people who think that that's what the USA and the Soviet Union were doing.
Well,
That that was their
it was at
grand.
least part of it. Part of the
Okay.
part of the thing was to get to show that we're spacefaring now, and if you don't help us right now, like this is our great filter. You better stop in, otherwise we're gonna ruin this for you to study later. So
Yeah, well, it would be. I mean, look, my background's in anthropology, and I guess if a message came from the remote Amazon that like a bunch of people that had, never been studied were about to just disappear like by their own hand unless I came and like did something about it, well then God, yeah, I'd be highly tempted to rock up and try to do something
yeah,
about it, whatever that might be.
yeah,
But like I do wonder, like I don't think that aliens are, going to be any worse or better than us. Obviously I'm, once again I'm putting my own values on them. There is no reason to assume, though, that they would automatically want to crush us because, quite apart from anything else, the usual assumption if they want to crush us is that they're desperately running short on resources, which is entirely possible, right? But on the other hand, it does seem that if they've managed to pick up our signal and we've managed to pick up theirs or whatever, that, you know, we also said earlier there's an awful lot of planets out there. So, like, maybe there's enough resources ultimately, unless their civilizations run for a very, very, very long time and there's a dreadful shortage and now it's time. Well, guess what? How much of a difference is Earth going to make to their dreadful shortage of materials or whatever sort of problem they're having? Like at the end of the day, we're just a tic tac, like.
we wish.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the that if you think of what is the edge, and this is something that I want to talk to you about another day, but
Yeah.
at the edge of a galactic empire would
Yeah.
be the terraforming.
Yeah.
That would be terraforming. Like that is what
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
edge of colonization is.
Mm.
If the colonization, the gray god theory or whatever, that is
Yeah.
that robots are spreading the universe and eventually robots hit, like the wave of robots hit the planet.
Yeah.
Does at least putting a flag up saying occupied on the planet, does that at least make some of those robot spaceships veer out of the way until the intelligent ones arrive at us? So,
Well, okay, first things first, you're going to have to explain more this grey god idea. Can you?
that's
Yeah.
that eventually intelligent life would get to the point of nano robots or robots that have the idea of they
Yeah.
that their whole purpose is to land on a planet, colonize it with nano or whatever type of robot is, and the robot's only function is to prepare the Earth or to prepare more of these robots to spread.
Oh, yeah, I see. I see. Yeah, so the first ambassadors we would discover from the other intelligence was not, in fact, the owners of the intelligence themselves. It would be their servitors in the form of,
Yeah.
things that
And
they've made. Sure.
I'm not sure what series of Star Trek this is, but the replicators,
Yeah. Yeah.
the robots that just show up and they have no conscious, or they don't even care they just want to like basically process the planet for whatever their means is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, look, let's go back to our chauvinistic concept earlier about the Goldilocks zone of what habitable planets are and the kind of conditions that intelligent life would require. Well, I would think that the Earth is already quite suitable, apart from perhaps the damage we've already done to it, and so maybe the main improvement they would make would be to get rid of all the humans. That's
Yeah.
certainly,
And
that's okay. Now we're talking a plausible. Suddenly, this is the most plausible reason for getting rid of humanity. And certainly, I think that a lot of the UFO hopes and dreams and fears over the years have been about why are humans so quick to assume that the alien intelligence is going to want to wipe us out? And part of it relates to the Cold War, that we were quite convinced, a lot of people were quite convinced that Russia had absolutely no hesitation about destroying all of us, which is false, of course. But I think that there's another element to it, which is we have a sort of guilty conscience in a way, humanity. And I think that the idea that someone would want to destroy us because we're bad I think
yeah,
just makes a lot of sense to people, you know?
yeah, and you know it, and what you said before is about the if an alien show, like if you think about all of Earth's history and the chances being 21% oxygen and this carbon dioxide that's is really low, and life is less successful now than it was at other aeons in our past where there was more
Mm,
oxygen or more different types of nutrients around. Like
yeah.
our Earth has been like depleted by the success of other creatures,
Yeah.
like the sea life that took all of the calcium out of the ocean.
Mm,
They imagine if we had this much calcium, we could be 10 foot tall with bones as thick as trees. So assuming that an alien would show up and be like, "Oh, sweet, you've got your 21% oxygen. That's just what we need," is almost laughable,
yeah.
because life isn't that good in 21% oxygen. It just happens that our life is. So
Okay, so you're saying there's actually, on the balance of probabilities, a lot of species might want more oxygen.
yeah, well, I mean, the age of the super insects was, back when the oxygen was incredible. The ratio of tree, there was no like, no decomposition. Trees just went crazy, and the branch of insects was way more successful than we could dream. Um,
Oh, okay. So invertebrates were just going off because with more oxygen, the invertebrate body structure can get bigger. Is that the basic idea?
Well, yeah, yeah. Essentially,
Yeah.
they don't breathe actively like us. They breathe in a different way. So just having more oxygen means that their breathing structures can work better. And in a sense, their breathing structures are better than ours because we have to put a lot of effort into breathing.
Oh,
But
mammalian. So mammalian respiration is sort of relatively inefficient.
well,
Okay.
it's good,
Yeah.
it's good, but it's not.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy for us to do that.
Right.
Whereas an insect can just like pump its whole body to breathe. We're breathing.
Yeah.
They're essentially their lungs are there. It's connected to their veins, and they just pump their whole body to breathe. Whereas we're
Yeah.
pumping an organ, which is then cycling it through with other organs. So
But because of the lack of a spine and like a skeletal system, there's a limit to how big they can get. But if the oxygen level was higher, they could be much bigger, right?
yes, they
Yeah,
they
and
were
they were at an
yeah.
earlier date. Okay, so hang on. So what made that change?
Well, essentially, the more oxygen, the more fire, and then there's lots of trees, and trees fuel plus oxygen equals.
Mm,
Well, that's a theory. I mean, there's
yeah.
obviously lots of
No,
theories,
I
but
think it's very credible.
yeah,
Yeah.
but the idea that if intelligent life, if you were to take all of intelligent life and go, when would it probably have grown? That's when I would point at, the time where
Fire.
yeah, well, the time when Earth was booming with life because there was so much oxygen and so much, So if you
Uh,
were another intelligent species, who says why wouldn't the age of insects be the golden age of intelligent life?
and,
Why the
and well, and that brings us to the idea that intelligent life may have already existed on the planet before now. Yeah.
well, yeah, in the form
Yeah.
of giant dragonflies, which would be absolutely terrifying,
Oh,
intelligent,
I can't think of anything worse. No, absolutely. Yeah,
six
apart from
foot, 6 foot.
giant cockroaches is worse.
Yes, 10 meter long cockroaches that were intelligent as us. It just sounds horrific.
Yeah.
They would eat and survive off. I mean, realistically, if you think of the survival of the fittest and the Darwinian, if a spacefaring planet of
Mm.
a spacefaring species of intelligent cockroaches, probably much more successful than a spacefaring
Oh.
of apes. Like we kind of suck. We
Oh,
need
yeah, but having said that, they need this incredibly oxygen-rich atmosphere,
yes,
though.
yes, and
That's
and
the one advantage we have.
yes, that's our advantage. Okay. They need more oxygen. Take that.
So they're going to send their nanobots that they've made.
To plant trees or whatever their photosynthetic things are. They're just
Yeah.
going to populate the planet, and they're going to show up and be like, "Sweet, heaps of oxygen. Don't light any cigarettes, though."
Don't burn down this forest. Okay.
Yes.
And so, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I suppose it's possible to imagine a prior Earth, and maybe we have records of this, where there was so much vegetation and the air was so moist that like lightning strikes just couldn't even start a fire. Is that like a thing? Because I
Well,
would imagine that lightning strikes would still start fires eventually, but I guess things have to be dry enough.
Yeah, and there's the periods of Earth history where not only was it moist enough to prevent things like that, but also like it rained for like 100 million years.
It
So
just rained non-stop.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
mean, if you were a kind of intelligent species that needed that moisture, then like that was around for 100 million years before we were. That's probably a great time to start intelligent life too. So
Sure. Yeah.
in the history of we can only take our planet as the example, but you would assume a lot of planets go through similar cycles of what happens as the planet goes through different chemical processes. Is that
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
that an age of 100 million years of rain, if you formed that time in 100 million years of rain and you were terraforming planets, you would start shaking them for like I mean, for us to terraform a planet to get to what we need is difficult, but to terraform it and say I need just lots of clouds, well, I mean, boom,
Just
there,
constant precipitation and cloud cover
yeah, you
is
just
more achievable than our demands. Yeah.
yes, yeah, and when it comes to our oxygen, oxygen is a very finicky thing. Like it's only a couple of million years you go back, our oxygen isn't even close to what it was. It was it's been higher and lower, just in recent history.
What's the
So
difference 2 million years ago? Wow, I never knew this. What's the difference
I
two
mean,
million years
off the
ago?
top of my head, I'm not, but
Yeah.
I think it's increasing over the like I mean, even back to this when humanity was birthed, say like let's say 200 to a million years
Yeah.
back, whatever you want to.
Roundabouts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it was still slightly different to what it was today. Like it was
Yeah.
basically the same, but if you go back 5 million years, it's totally different. Like
Yeah,
it's
and
it's
certainly if you went back to before the last ice age, I guess it would be yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
go back to
Yeah.
the time dinosaur time. Dinosaurs as recent, like we can go dig up their bones. That's recent. That's
Yeah.
10-20% different. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is very significant, I guess. So there's a chance even that like you got in your time machine and went back to the late, Cretaceous or whatever, that you couldn't even the human body just wouldn't even cope with the
yeah,
circumstances.
if you
Or
got, I think if you got in a time machine and went to dinosaur time, you would be gasping for air the whole time. It would be
wow.
a very unpleasant, or you would either be gasping for air or delusional of the amount of oxygen that all of a sudden you've been presented with. So
Hypoxia or hyperxia,
yeah,
hyperoxia or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, there's
So, wow. Okay. Well, so yeah. So even that. So yeah, that's the one line of defense we have is that we can cope with a relatively low amount of oxygen. Love it.
yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah, we have pumps. So
but I do think though that I am very attracted to the idea in a completely relatively unscientific way. Have no way of knowing whether there's any truth to this or not, really. But I am very much attracted to the idea that the cycles are what gave rise to life, intelligent life, and I don't even think that it's not just the tides, it's not just the Earth's axial shift, it's not just the seasons, it's not just the precipitative cycle of it's wet more one end of the year and drier more one end of the year. There's all those cycles. There's cycles like the mammals are down here in the lowland, then they go up high, then they go back down, then they go up high. There's all these oscillations like in the planet, and there's geological oscillations, and there's all these cycles on planet Earth. It's indisputable. There's all these sort of two pole, the magnetic oscillation, north to south every so often. The oscillation between ice age and non-ice age, and then there's ones that happen at other scales, bigger and smaller, and
and
there's
and
yeah,
all of that is assuming like the absolutely self-indulgent idea that life would form on land. Like that's even
yes,
forgetting
yes,
the fact that life in the ocean is way more vast and way more complex than on land.
yeah, yeah,
And the idea of intelligent life forming in the ocean. Well, I mean, we have octopuses that I would say are pretty intelligent. If you went
yeah.
from not intelligent to intelligent, they're pretty high up there.
Yeah, they're
So
on the scale
yeah,
towards the end. Sure. Yeah.
and a dolphin. I mean, although a dolphin returning to ocean,
Yeah.
but let's just go with octopus. That
Yeah.
thing's got a pretty big brain, and
Yeah.
and and if we went, if there was no land, I'm pretty sure eventually there were, the octopus, if being intelligent was a way to improve its survivability, it would get more intelligent. So
Yes. So there's certainly. Well, that's the thing. This takes me back to oscillation, right? So one of the leading theories about 10, 15 years ago about primate, human hominid intelligence, I should say, was that it was so our sort of physical survival and thriving, and the fact that there's billions of humans is down to things like tides and like the Nile flooding at certain intervals and all that. So I said oscillations are really, really, really important. But there's also an argument that says the development of our very cognitive capacity itself goes back to oscillations as well, particularly climatic oscillations, right? That's what, not just on the yearly cycle, but on the 50-year cycle or 100-year cycle or whatever, that caused us to go through extremes. And for our species, in a general sense, including other hominids that didn't make it, but we have some of their DNA, that there were times when our numbers were very, very, very small because of extreme conditions. And then we expanded in number again, and then we got shrunk back down again, then we expanded in number again. And that it's this intense pressure of like having to adapt, not just on a bodily level, but on a cultural level, to adapt our behavior in a conscious way or perhaps an unconscious way. That's what some say led to the development of language and like group cooperation and all that sort of stuff that humans can do.
Yeah, and on one of the things that I found the most interesting is that going back in humanity's history, what's the least amount of people they've like obviously it started with a very few amount of people that whatever the origin of humanity was.
Yeah.
But what's the most it's shrunk to? And there's been times in humanity's history it's shrunk to only a few thousand people. So
that's right. I've even heard a number as low as a few hundred. Yeah.
So it doesn't take much for intelligent life to fight its way back up to the billions.
No. That's right.
And humanity, we're in no way suited for all these environments that we occupy.
No.
So in terms of
our bodies,
our bodies are absolutely not. We live in the desert and Antarctica and all those places which are extremes. If only we were a more robust kind of character, imagine all the other places we could live on other planets. If we needed less, the fact that warm-blooded, it sucks in space. Space is cold. It's cold. If you were cold-blooded, you could probably live a lot longer.
It's cold and full of electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If only we had some kind of shielding and lead wasn't poison, so we could just take some lead pills to prevent that radiation.
That's right.
Imagine if lead was a core component like iron was. That'd sound good.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, this goes back to the octopus, right? So the octopus living in this vast ocean, and let's say they go from being, millions of octopuses to like billions and trillions, right? And they just sort of have long enough that they can just get super smart. And I guess my initial objection to that was, oh, well, this watery planet sounds like a remarkably stable sort of environment, and I don't think there's going to be enough pressures one way or the other to drive things. But who am I to say that a big old watery planet would not in fact be full of pressures, and that maybe there would be oscillations within this fascinatingly alien and horrifyingly alien watery environment? Maybe that would have enough pressures that arose from like things that I don't even understand. But it's also possible that intelligence could evolve in a relatively static environment. But I tend to favor what you said earlier, which is, the human body is not very good at surviving in snow or the extreme desert for very long, but the human body is very good at making clothing and shelter. The human mind is very good at coming up with these things. And so ultimately our hands became our means of adaptation, followed by the machines that we made.
Yeah.
The machines we made became our means of adaptation, and that's where we're at now. So, presumably sooner or later we're going to come up with something that's going to protect us from all that solar radiation as we cross the wastes of space. Yeah.
Yeah, and that it comes back to if there was an intelligent life form that hadn't accidentally evolved hands to swing through trees,
Yeah.
is that a bit of a sad story of if you don't have some kind of way to construct a spaceship together with a nuts and bolts, are you a sad, intelligent cockroach sitting there going snip, snip, snip? Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I do think that yes, there's a lot of truth in that. I'm also, I'm very much of the opinion that things that exist are good enough as they are, and so I guess I'm happy to imagine a humanity that actually never made it to the stars. I'm actually quite okay with that idea too. Um,
yeah.
you
This
know,
that
yeah,
something that I want to talk to you about another day is perhaps and I don't want to get into this at all, but us viewing I hope, fingers crossed we don't blow the planet up any day soon, but humanity has a long time left on this planet. We've made it, what, 200 to a million years.
yeah,
We have like a trillion left, or let's just say until the Earth blows up, we've got like
yeah.
6 or 7 billion left. That's a damn long time.
Mhm.
Um, we could probably figure some things out in that time. I hope.
Certainly, yeah,
We figured out a fair few things, and and I don't want to get into it, but essentially, thinking about what level of like I said right back at the start, if I was to think of a time so far in the future I couldn't imagine it, if I went to 13 billion, it would be, and to think of another intelligent civilization out there 8 billion years ago. So they had 5 billion years to come into existence, long time. Um, what would they be thinking another 7 billion years into their existence? That's a damn long time to be an intelligent kind of life form.
mm. It sure is. It certainly dwarfs, let's say, what's the longest lived species today? As in the sort of genome that's been around the longest that we have at the moment. Is it like sharks or something like that?
There's, I mean, you'd have to go, but there's types of bacteria that like have
Oh well,
similar
yeah.
similar lineages to right back at the start of the dawn of life. So
Mm.
and the probably sharks do those kind of speak, but there are simple types of flatworm and all that go back billions of years.
Yeah, yeah,
Really simple kinds of life that you know in comparison to a universe age is nothing. Like
yeah. It's
you
still
know
not a very long time. I was going to say like the closest sort of large animal I think is maybe a shark. So like the as we sharks, literally exactly the same sharks as we have today, have been around for like 300 million years or
Yeah,
something.
I mean 300 million years, but ironically 300 million years probably it's seems long to us, but 300 million years there was
Yeah,
dinosaurs around. I mean,
yeah.
like then they're pretty. You could go some plants go like basic kinds of like fern or moss go
That have
back.
been around for longer.
Yeah, even longer. Like that's up into the 3 or 4 billion years. Looking like
Yeah, ferns are very cool, aren't they? Yeah,
yeah.
they've been around for a long time, just doing their ferny thing.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and fungi is, to think of it, why is intelligent life based on some kind of like animal, kingdom,
Oh,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Fungi's been around, the fungi ruled the planet once. There was
So,
skyscrapers of fungi. So,
yeah, fungi is a fundamental taxa that gets hugely neglected. We tend to think about animals and then we think about plants second, and fungus very much gets neglected in people's thinking. Although I would argue that fungus has become a lot more thought about in recent years, a lot more celebrated, partly thanks to things like magic mushrooms, which has really got a huge folklore around it. People now believe that they're a way to contact an alien intelligence. Magic mushrooms basically are an alien intelligence that like talk to you while you're under the influence, which is like pretty out there even for me, that idea. But it's certainly an interesting one. But but when it comes to whether sharks had a different thought in their head over the 300 million years they existed, well, yeah,
You
Don't
know,
know.
and,
Doesn't seem to me. No.
and I don't. I mean, I'm absolutely no clue on. But the idea of coexisting universes, or in the same space or dimensions in the same space is
Oh yeah,
you know uh,
shadow civilizations. Yeah.
yeah, on top of us, and the other day, I watched the movie, oh uh, the where they go to Neptune, and they have a spaceship that's in it. Oh, what's the edge of a black hole called?
Event Horizon.
Event Horizon. I watched the movie Event Horizon, and I was really disappointed because they were about to. The premise of the first half of the movie is about getting to the stars with gravity drive, and the conclusion of the movie, spoiler alert, is that the gravity drive doesn't go to other planets in our universe. It just travels to alternate universes, and it happens to be this other universe is significantly worse and hellish. So you know
So it's really a horror film rather
Yes, it was a
rather
horror
than
film.
the
I was having to see a science fiction, like science fiction or science fantasy of going to other planets. What I got was you're in hell.
Oh no, 100%. Well, I think a lot of recent sci-fi has actually, this is a whole nother topic, but I think it's one worth discussing. I think a lot of recent sci-fi has definitely gotten away from that sort of excitement to explore space, and I think that a lot of recent sci-fi has very much reflects humanity's current fears, more than our hopes, perhaps. So, Interstellar, being an obvious example that, like, oh, I see. We've actually very nearly run out of any chance we had whatsoever to like make it. And like personally, as much as that's a not a nice idea to think about, I think it is one that's really worth thinking about. And other movies, yeah, like Event Horizon, really it's a horror movie. Interstellar, really it's a movie about
Oh,
being
and
sad,
don't get me the one of my biggest disappointments in a cinema is when Interstellar became like a multi-dimensional library where it went away from what it was, and all of a sudden he was like, I guess he was in the dimension as himself, looking in a library at himself, sending himself messages. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, I really just wished it stuck to that. My mind was blown that someone had the idea of like multiple times in a gravity sphere, like you go near the black
Yeah.
hole, time goes quicker, but or slower, whatever it was. It was slower,
Yeah.
but then it went to like he was in the back of a library sending himself messages, and I was like, oh, come on.
You've gone and look. The idea was interesting, but you shouldn't have pursued it.
Yeah,
Like
that
you
it
stuffed it.
it connects the event is that someone like a really great screenwriter with a lot of scientific knowledge sat down and wrote a movie, and then someone at a movie production film was like, but what are we gonna? When's the interesting part? What about space aliens and like the multi dimensions
Yeah,
and
I think Jordan, that is almost exactly what happened. Because I actually listened to something the other day about like how that movie was made, and apparently there was a lot of trouble taken on the science side of things. They really, really spent money on scientists, and they had proper scientists in there telling them sciencey stuff. And then they were like, "Great, we've got all that. Now, how about this?"
yeah. Yeah, I know that the Star Treks and the Star Wars, they're two huge franchises that address the idea of the galaxy being covered in life.
Yeah,
But perhaps
and let's just say they're both a lot more hopeful than Interstellar and Event Horizon are. Certainly, yeah.
but perhaps I don't know about back when they first came out, but definitely now they're viewed as like a total fantasy.
Oh,
But
100%.
but
Yeah.
but but
Yeah.
it's not that in this kind of conversation, it's not that hard to imagine. Maybe that's not a fantasy. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
the idea of going to the space bar with like, weird and wonderful,
And breathing the same air,
yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
yeah,
slug man and, insect boy are like, oh,
yeah,
how are you going?
yeah.
Maybe people turn around and go, wow, look at that fleshy blob, you know, you
Well,
know,
I mean, it's interesting, of course, that Star Trek is a little bit more conservative. It tends to be sort of humanoid species, essentially, that we are sort of grokking with, to use a '60s term. But I certainly would count myself amongst the people that thinks that all of these possibilities can exist at the same time, and that, you know, what awaits us in the stars, it is either we never get there at all, interstellar, or we get there and it's wonderful and we're all wearing crisp uniforms and we're all thinking philosophically about what we should do when we encounter life, or we're out there blasting it to smithereens. Or, you know, I think the human being really embodies all of these possibilities.
And
Like yeah,
I want to imagine that we probably assume that we're like pretty, even if there was intelligent life pretty frequently in the universe, it'd be pretty far away. But
yeah,
but there's some intelligent life out there. Let's just say that this all makes sense. There's some intelligent life who just conveniently is on the next star. Like on the
yeah,
just one in a trillion of a trillion, still
yeah.
it's still a possibility
It's still a
that
chance. Yeah.
intelligent life on this planet and this planet right next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, imagine, like, obviously like seen Mars and Venus. They're not filled with some kind of slug intelligence, but there's probably some solar system out there that just happens to have grown more than one. If life is on every planet, like we've hypothesized here, that what if there was life on Mars and Earth and Mars, and they stopped Mars, shedding its atmosphere because they were intelligent enough to do that. You know, Imagine the universe, a solar system with 7 intelligent beings of different planets. What could they accomplish with their shared knowledge? It'd be
Imagine.
it would
Well, I
make
mean, that was essentially what basically most sci-fi in sort of 100 to about 70 years ago started with the premise that just about all of the planets were inhabited, or at least one or two, right? And then you fast forward about a generation or so, and then it's like, oh well, it's nearby stars. And so I think that was pretty much the dominant premise, the one you're talking about. In more recent times, we've gone to the assumption that the universe is much more sparsely populated, and as you say, that Star Trek and Star Wars are very well. Star Trek is a utopia, obviously, and Star Wars is a fantasy. It is
yeah,
literally, it belongs in the genre of fantasy. It has more in common with Lord of the Rings than it does with Star Trek, if you know what I'm saying.
yeah,
But like, both of those things are fantasies in their own way.
and
And
I,
yeah,
I just
yeah,
just bringing this all back to some of the things about real life is that often we think of galaxies as like unimaginably far, like we could never
yeah,
reach another galaxy.
vast.
But
Yeah,
an interesting
yeah,
fact is that our nearest galaxy, or nearest spiral galaxy, is the Andromeda galaxy, which is coming towards us. So
yeah.
let's assume the Fermi paradox is merely that one per galaxy, and you can't get across a galaxy. Uh,
Let's say there's a solid wall between them.
yeah,
In practical terms. Yeah,
yeah. If there was one intelligent life form per galaxy of 100 billion stars that could, or 100 billion planets that could populate one galaxy but never make it out of that galaxy.
yeah.
Well, galaxies, much like the idea of solar systems going through those Oort clouds, do pass by each other every once in a while. Um,
They
what,
overlap, in fact.
yeah. So if we're the only one in our galaxy that's intelligent, and we populate this to every planet has a human being or whatever we become in the future on it, and we have a little pass by of Andromeda, well, it would only make sense to just go like, I'm just going to go over there as well, guys. Yeah.
100%. Who is going to jump ship
Yeah.
while the opportunity presents itself? A
Yeah.
lot of people, not everyone, but enough people.
Yeah. I mean,
Both
when,
sides.
thinking of the idea of like, humanity's population to be 100 trillion is not, if we were on 100 planets, it's not that hard to imagine 100 trillion existing.
Sure. Yeah. No. It's possible that there could be as many of us now as there are ants today on the planet.
You want to move? You want to move to the suburbs? Well, sure, but you've got to go to Andromeda because that's the only place.
That is the suburbs.
Yeah, that's the suburbs.
Yeah.
And what if the Fermi paradox of like, the idea of the filter of you can't, like, one of the ideas is there's great filters, and one of them is there's certain things in an intelligent life that you can't pass, and one of
Yes.
the more towards the end of it is that intelligent life can't jump between a galaxy because it's just too far.
Yeah.
But if galaxies pass by each other, well, what if that galaxy's had 13 billion years to form life, and ours has had 13 billion years to form life, and it formed us,
Yeah.
and we feel by the time we get to that galaxy, it's going to be a couple of more billion years. So,
Yeah.
no stress. But what if we meet and right on the edge of the galaxy, hello, hello, what they wave back, maybe the barrier is touching galaxies. So, or not just, but like getting close enough that you could travel to it without like intergalactic space shredding you to pieces.
Yeah, that it's a relatively small hop, like you're playing Frogger, and instead of like, let's
Yeah,
dive out into this inky blackness and swim
yeah,
forever and never ever reach anything. That's right. Instead, it's just let's hop from this lily pad to this one that's floating past.
yeah. What if the Fermi paradox is true, but only for like the great filters are only true, but for galaxies.
Yes.
What if the filter is the edge of the galaxy,
Yeah.
and to overcome the filter, you just need to hop onto the next closest one?
Yeah. Well, that's right. Exactly. You jump to the next. It's like those hypertube. One of the hypertube scenarios, which was you have like the inner lane, which is like traveling at like a blindingly fast speed, and then there's like an outer lane, which is going slightly slower, and then on occasion, you can hop between them. And so, because if you need to stop at a certain station, like the inner loop just keeps going forever, and then like the middle loop, you can hop onto that, and then it hops you onto one that's going to stop at a station. So like, yeah, I'm picturing like a parallax 16-bit video game from like the Commodore Amiga, and there's a brief opportunity now and then to hop onto a different platform.
Yeah,
And then that takes you out of your own galaxy. Goodbye.
yeah, and although galaxies generally trend to be forever getting further and further apart due to expanding universe theory, there are some that pass by each other every once in a while. And I assume if you went back to maybe a time where intelligent life could have initially formed, like a few billion years into maybe even a few 100 million years into the universe, let's just say everything was, lined up to a T. Galaxies were a bit closer together back then. So the idea,
Yes.
even though there's like an infinite amount of them, you could probably jump a bit easier when they were a bit closer.
Yeah, that's certainly plausible. And let's say it didn't take 13 billion years to arrive at intelligent life in every case. Maybe it took considerably less in some cases. And or is it possible that other ones had been around for a lot longer than ours?
Well,
Before now, or is that not something we can know, or what have we got on that?
Well, obviously, like it comes back to that idea of we are merely a pixel on an infinitely large photo of the galaxy.
Yeah.
They would also, how far would their, even if their signal is basically your galaxy, you can send a signal across the galaxy in like 100,000 years, but to get to the next galaxy is another million years.
Yeah.
So even if you have you could populate the whole galaxy in the time it would take to send a signal to the next one. So
you'd have filled up the available space. Yeah, by the time So I think one metaphor I heard once was the galaxies were like, imagine if you could stand on a mountain at night and look out over a vast plain, and there was just a campfire here and a campfire there. That's what the galaxies were, with all that space in between.
Yeah, so imagining populating more galaxies in a time where they were closer, probably, and the idea of like, because intergalactic space is pretty empty, but imagine a time where it was more filled because it was more compact.
Yes.
And you had a spacecraft that could consume intergalactic material to fuel itself or something. So, something that
certainly. Yeah, well, I mean, that's obviously the kind of thing you would have to propose, because a voyage of that kind, you either had an infinite fuel supply or you had to collect it along the way.
Yeah,
and
the idea of the pillars of life and those kind of things, where it's vast amounts of space dust. Well, back hundreds, back billions of years ago. Well, there was more space dust because it hadn't been blast it away. So you could just shovel it in like some, you're what are those trains that shovel coal?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those. Like, here we go on our spaceship. Here's some space dust. Just
I'm picturing a train that's mining its own coal as it goes. Yep,
yeah,
love it.
through a like a coal, just like a boring machine that's powered off coal that it bores through the coal. An
Oh yeah,
infant,
yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, it's digging a tunnel that is powered by the stuff that
yeah,
it's digging. I love it. I love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine, between two galaxies, just a big cloud of material that you could fuel yourself with.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
Well,
because like
we have.
most of space dust is just hydrogen and helium, because that is what
Yeah.
most of the galaxy is. You just need some kind of fuel or some kind of engine that was of hydrogen and helium, and then you just plow through the space dust.
Well, I mean, certainly it's not inconceivable, and of course, well, my understanding from probably about the age of 10 was that the Big Bang began with just clouds of hydrogen and helium, sort of, slowly compacting. I don't know if that's what we still think, but
Yeah, well, I don't want to get into it. That's a
no, no,
you know.
that yeah,
But yeah, but there is a theory out there, which is back to the panspermia, is that the first molecules of life didn't develop on the planets, or the first self-replicating signs of life developed in these dust clouds. Because why do we need an atmosphere? Why do we need all of that?
yeah,
Why can't we just be? Why couldn't a molecule replicate on a block of space dust, hit the next block of space dust, and it just contaminates all the other space dust
yeah,
when before a planet even exists? Like
yeah.
the idea that solar systems were formed with life infected space dust.
Yeah,
So
that's right. And this whole idea that you have to have rocky planets with like liquid water on them is, yeah, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It is an incredibly narrow view of what it is.
yeah,
And
and obviously, I'm not proposing that intelligent life floated around in the cosmos, but
no,
like life itself could have floated.
that's all we were talking about initially with panspermia was
Yeah.
just, well, to take a very minimal definition of life, something that self-replicates is our basic definition. Yes?
Yeah, yeah. That's what I would, because to be honest, like to say intelligent life was on each planet would be far fetched, I
A
believe.
vast read.
Because
Yes.
even if you showed up to Earth in any sense of time, you would, if you just picked the time in Earth's history and said it showed up, you wouldn't find intelligent life. You have to be so lucky to arrive now.
That's
and,
right.
And that's one of the theories, is that if intelligent life has been here before, they would have been severely disappointed for the last, billions of years, because they would have gone, oh my God, giant lizard, haha. That's a funny one. Take one to the zoo, guys. We're off.
Yes.
But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
but the idea that that we would coexist at the same time as that intelligent species. So
Well, and I guess that's part of what Fermi might have been on about was that, to go back to my metaphor of standing on the mountaintop in the middle of the night and looking out across a vast, dark plain with just a campfire here and a campfire there. Well, Fermi is basically saying you're standing on the mountain and you can't see any campfires.
yeah, and two people have to light the campfire at the same time.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
even if there is a million campfires out there, you got to light. The idea that there's no signals blasting through the universe, well, we've only been listening for a while, and perhaps some civilization was sending out signals for 1 billion years, going, "Oh goddamn, no one's answering in the Milky Way. Hang the phone up. That's a waste of our time."
Let's call a different direction.
Yeah. Perhaps we're just too slow in picking up the signal, and they're literally sitting on Alpha Centauri or whatever, around their campfire, going, "Man, this is a good planet." That Earth with the lizards was funny, though.
Absolutely. And look, I realize that this is completely revealing my massive ignorance of all of the incredible mathematics that was involved in the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox is expressed as a sort of philosophical position, but actually a lot of mathematics went into it. They made some assumptions, they took some available facts, and then they applied a whole bunch of complex equations and stuff, and then came up with this idea that, well, look, basically we've run the numbers through all of our available physics, and we've decided it's impossible. And that's fine. But I still think it's the height of arrogance, and it's just a massive leap to say, oh no, there's definitely nothing out there. It's a huge leap.
Yeah, and it connects to like humans' inability to see what is like. If you went back to even when I was a kid and said, "There's a guy who could, there's a guy who could send likely hundreds of thousands of people to another planet," I would have been like, "What?" But
Yeah,
realistically, if you just chuck people on like the start, like this, a SpaceX spaceship, you could get them to Mars without, like, I mean, ethically, you probably wouldn't, but you could do it. So, so the idea of spreading the galaxy was when all of these things was, formulated, is the idea that it's impossible to explore the galaxy.
yeah.
But now it's not even that. It's not even that far out of our realm of possibility that we're
No,
gonna.
and certainly if we send out our little nanobots to explore it, it's even easier.
Like, I would say the step between going from Earth to the moon was a smaller step than us going to the nearest star, because all we need to do is we already learned that you can do that. Like, someone came up with it in the rocket calculations and what fuels work, and even the thought of we need
Oh,
computers to get us there. So,
yeah, no, the moon was a larger step. Yes,
oh yeah,
absolutely.
sorry, that's what I meant. If the moon
Yeah,
was
yeah.
harder, in terms of conceptualizing, all we need to get
Yeah.
to the nearest star is just time. You could send a SpaceX with a robot now. It would take 1,000 years, but you could do it.
Well, I think that in many ways, one of the best comparisons we have is picturing, you know, the people of Europe in 1300 trying to find better trade routes and just beginning the sort of modern era and just beginning their colonial expansion into the rest of the world. Just very, very small bits at a time. The Canary Islands and the Azores. Europe sort of was expanding into the Atlantic just a tiny little bit, right? And so settling the Canaries and the Azores and Cape, the Verde, whatever that other island was called, that was like a big enough step to even just get that far.
Yeah, and
And
the way that
yeah,
it
go
was
on.
viewed to go across an ocean was viewed as like you're literally never coming back. The chances of you
Yeah,
coming back is nothing, because
yeah.
there could literally be infinite ocean for infinite, a lifetime of ocean, which is
No one had, other than say Ptolemy in the fourth century, or whenever it was, who figured out that the Earth was round based on his calculations and observations of stars and things moving around and stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, we're going around the sun. Like, so he figured that out and like figured out that it was round. And by the way, Jordan, you're probably aware of this. Estimated the diameter of the Earth to like a
yeah.
very, very precise amount. And like, so even with all of
That's
that knowledge,
the experiment with the stick stuck in the ground.
yes,
I've seen that.
yeah,
Yeah, that's yeah. The foresight back then is just it's mind blowing.
absolutely. And it's a very important reminder that humans in the past were just as smart as we are. They just had less to go on. They
Yeah,
didn't have as much prior knowledge to go on, but they certainly were just as smart as we are. And so picture these people that are just as smart as we are standing there on the edge of Europe in 1300 thinking, what is out there? And they eventually settle these islands in like the near Atlantic. But the idea that no one was quite sure, because that knowledge from Ptolemy's era had sort of more or less been lost completely, and they were slowly starting to get it back. No one was quite sure whether there was just a vast ocean that went on forever or whether there was, in fact, something relatively reachable on the other side of it. Because as it turned out, it didn't take Columbus all that long to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Like once
yeah,
they actually pushed out into it, they got there in a, hardly anyone died getting there.
yeah.
Like it was, but, but,
Yeah, and,
but
and the idea that when they got there, they thought the Earth was so small that they just made it to India, which was just the other way a bit. Like, oh, this is India, guys. Like,
yeah.
you missed the whole damn section of the planet. So,
Yeah, that is the incredible thing about Columbus. He really was a tremendously ambitious man. He was a very egotistical man. We actually know quite a lot about him as a person, and he was obviously very courageous, and obviously quite unconcerned with other people and what they thought, and which was both a good thing and a bad thing, in lots of ways. But it is incredible to me that he died still thinking that that was India. Like, it just absolutely beats me because there was so much evidence becoming clear that, like, oh no, this isn't like a little. They knew the shape of India, and this continent was turning out to have a very, very, very different shape. And there was so much evidence about how the languages were different and all of that, and he just completely ignored all of that. But he was definitely right about one thing, which was there's definitely somewhere you can go to over there. He was right about that.
What do you think? Connecting that idea of Columbus going to a different continent with perhaps like arrogance or
self-belief.
Yeah. The first humans to go and explore another planet. Does Neil Armstrong pale in comparison to the first person to go to a new planet?
It's a good question. Well, I think that there's an obvious difference between Armstrong and Columbus, which is that, Armstrong, for all of his, like, he's definitely like a formidable man, rest in peace. But he was very much operating within an institution. He was an institutional man. He was a military kind of guy, chain of command. He was a scientific kind of guy. Columbus was none of those things. Columbus was not institutional, and he was not scientific, except in the sense that he had a theory and he wanted to test it. So he was scientific in that sense. But, NASA is full of team players, Jordan,
well, you have to imagine as much as NASA might be the force of today, I don't. It's very like one country. This will be this has to be the world's. There's only two options. It's the World Space Organization or it's corporate. Yeah, and this is a topic I want to talk about with you, Wonder. But the idea of corporate entities exploring to the next galaxy.
Okay, 100%. So Columbus is definitely more on the corporate than on the institutional sort of state side. But I think in a very real sense, Columbus was like venture capital. He was like, go get money and go do this thing. And this was a profit thing. Like, Columbus wanted to show everybody that he was clever, but the other motive was to make money. Like, let's not forget that. And like, obviously the effect on the people that lived there in the New World, it wasn't the New World to them. It was the old world to them. Like, let's not forget. It was the only world to them, And then, Columbus, the effect of Columbus's discovery, someone would have figured it out sooner or later. So I'm not blaming Columbus here specifically, but he didn't care about what happened to those people all that much. But, when it comes to the kind of people that are going to cross space, I think it's the same kind of thing, Jordan. I don't think they're going to care a lot about the impact that it has on. I think some of them are going to. I think Neil Armstrong was the kind of guy who probably would have thought, if he was alive today and he was getting on a voyage to Mars, he would have thought a lot about, how do we avoid, polluting that planet, and how do we avoid, like, he would have thought a lot about like responsible, ethical travel. But yes. I think a lot of them today, just the kind of people that would do it, wouldn't.
Yeah, one of the things that I spent a lot of time thinking is that the first words of the person on the moon. I don't know about the history of the selection of the words, but the fact that it was something that wasn't like it wasn't like, here's America, bam. It was a very it was a very like human message to send.
Yes, for all of America's faults and for all of its obviously imperial ambitions, and for all the terrible things they've done in Latin America and the terrible things they've done in the Middle East, when it came to the space program, there was something different about it, and I think that has to do with the institutional nature of what they were doing. Well, you could argue the Army is an institution, the Navy is an institution. That's certainly true, but when you think about the kind of people that were staffing NASA, they were scientists, they were engineers, they were mathematicians, they were curious people who weren't particularly. Some of them had an imperial imagination. Some of them had probably read sci-fi novels where humans go and conquer space, and some of them probably had imperial ideologies in them, and some of them probably wanted to beat the Russians. But I think for the vast majority of them, it was just curiosity, and it was the cooperative venture that they were interested in. And because we know this, because at the height of the Cold War, Americans and Russians met in space. Well, there were several heights, obviously, but they actually joined up in space, and they found probably it's not surprising now when you think about it, but it turns out that the people that were up there and the people on Earth who were also communicating with one another to make this meeting happen basically felt very much that they had a shared mission. So that's the good news.
I'll bring it back. What do you let's just say NASA finds a microorganism that isn't earthbound on Mars.
Yeah.
What do you think they call it? Do you think what do we call alien? Do you think they name it a species? Do we name it? Do we have to come up with a new taxonomic? We've got all our canines and Homo sapiens and all that. Do we have to put like Earth Homo sapien, Earth canine? Like, do we have to? Then do we have like Mars? Bacteria 1 or whatever.
Do we have to re-taxonomize everything?
Yes, to include Earth. Like, this is an Earth. If all planets have life, we better come up with some way to determine where this damn life came from. If you're trying to read it in a book or in the future Wikipedia of all things.
Well, you might say though there is a branch of biological taxonomy that's not actually all that interested in where it came from. It just wants to classify it. It just wants to relate it. It just wants to see where it sits. And that bigger question of how did this thing even end up here in the first place? Well, it's possible we may need a whole new branch of taxonomy to deal with what we find in space. And do you remember but maybe we won't, because it may turn out that the things we find are
similar-ish,
not that different. Yeah. So, which would be a little bit disappointing in some ways, I must admit. But it's a strong possibility. And if anything, if I was a betting man, I would tend to say the first life we encounter, or maybe the first life we discover, maybe we encounter life without even realizing it, but the first life we consciously discover and document might actually be quite recognizable on some level.
Yeah. If Earth has somehow ended up on Mars and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, we're probably just going to be finding pretty
it turns out to be look, it's a bacteria.
Yeah, it's a bacteria, guys. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you want me to say?
Yeah.
Well, do you know what the press would be like? The press would be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, but tell us something that's really different about it." And they'd be like, well, it's a little bit different but not very. And the genome is
All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind us up now, Sam. We've been going for long enough. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to put on how our educated guess has gone?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's gone great. And I think if anybody is, managed to sit through it with us, they are absolute legends. And that I would, I hope you were doing the dishes. I hope you were gardening. I hope you were cycling while you listen to this. But also, I would say, let's go back to that vision of Vishnu floating in space, breathing out the cosmoses.
I think I'd like to go back to the ancient pharaohs believing the gods were ejaculating planets into space.
Giant space dick.
Yeah, let's go back to that. If anyone got this far, that's what I'll leave you with. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll leave you with giant space dick and, of course, causal ocean of milk and Vishnu floating in space, breathing out the universes through every pore and then breathing them back in again. And the reason that I mention that is because I think it's much more. Well, I'm not even entirely sure what the Hindu scriptures actually have to say about the life that exists in these other places, where they're all strictly Homo sapiens living in these other planets. These other cosmoses in their own little bubbles. I don't know. I'm going to have to go and look it up. But I will say this: the idea that the galaxies are forever expanding and getting further apart is a bit of a melancholy thought, as far as I'm concerned. And so I'd be much happier with the idea that Vishnu is breathing them out and then breathing them back in again. And so it's not like they're going to just drift apart forever and just become totally separated. They're actually all just going to get breathed back into a giant spaceman.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a sense, I'll say that I'm glad that they're expanding because uh, I assume a civilization advanced enough to conquer a whole galaxy. I don't really want them jumping over to us just yet. Maybe soon, but not just yet. Our space guns aren't advanced enough yet. So, assuming that they
Exactly.
even need
Yeah.
space guns, but I feel like as a human, I can't get away from the fact that my instinct is space guns. So,
Well, actually, I do think that it's going to be some sort of gun. But when it comes to like Vishnu breathing out the various cosmoses, I just realized they're all going to be quite close together at the very start, but then they're going to get further apart as they go like further away from like the pores. He's literally saying the universe has come out of the pores in his
yeah,
skin, which is like a crazy idea. But the pores are like really close together, I guess, to begin
yeah.
with. And then they spread out. So maybe you've got a chance to like jump dimensions at the very start.
Well, I picked this one still. So, thank you for your time, Sam. I want to make sure you go and do part two of being family for this afternoon. Otherwise, I stole you away all day. So, thank you
Oh
for.
no. Well, that's all right. Well, the family are all tucked away.
All right. Thank you for your time, Sam. And
All right.
thank you for anyone watching. And yeah, if you watch this far, feedback is appreciated in all senses. So, all
Yeah,
right.
that's right. Thank you
All
very
right.
much
Well,
for your attention.
all
Good
right.
night.
Well, all right. Good night.